Why did she flee when she heard the sound of engines in the distance? Not fear, not anymore. Something deeper, older. The sound pulled at muscle memory that Wyoming wind could never erase. It was late afternoon on the Morrison Ranch. The air carried that strange mix of summer dust and dry grass, the kind of smell that always reminded Alexandra of deployments, places where heat meant danger, and silence meant something worse. She was fixing a barn door, hands steady, mind quiet. Nails, hammer, wood, simple rhythm. The kind of life she'd come here to find after 9 years of doing things that didn't exist on record. But then came the noise, faint at first. Dozens of engines rolling together, disciplined in chaos. It wasn't joyriders. She knew that rhythm. This was a formation, coordinated, deliberate, confident. Her eyes lifted toward the valley. The highway that curved around Clearwater shimmered in heat haze, and she saw them before she heard them clearly, motorcycles. 30, maybe more. Dust cloud behind them like a moving storm. She leaned the hammer against the barn wall and wiped her hands on her jeans. Her pulse stayed slow, but her body, that body trained to read threat like second language, began its quiet calculations. Angles, terrain, distance. She told herself it wasn't her problem, not anymore. 2 years ago she'd promised herself. No more call signs, no more operations, no more ghosts. She built this place from silence, an old family property left to her when her parents retired to Arizona. 450 acres of peace. Horses, fences, and a sky so wide it almost made her believe she could outrun what she'd done. But peace is fragile, and some noises you never stop recognizing. She walked out of the barn, climbed the small hill beside the corral, and watched the town through the scope of the rifle she hadn't touched in months. The Iron Skulls, she didn't know the name yet, but she knew the type. 35 bikers rolling into a town of 600 people. Formation tight, behavior controlled. They weren't tourists. They were predators. Down in Clearwater, Sheriff Tom Mitchell would be watching too. She could imagine his face, confusion first, then that slow realization that help wasn't coming. 2 deputies, 1 small jail, no backup within an hour. The math didn't work. Alexandra lowered the scope. Not her fight, not this time. She turned back toward the barn, but her hands wouldn't move. Her body stayed still. The echo of those engines sank into her chest, resonating with something she'd buried deep, something called responsibility. Because the truth was, she could stop them. She could stop all of them. But if she did, she'd wake up the part of herself she'd worked so hard to silence. The part that didn't hesitate, didn't forgive, didn't come home easily. She stood there a long time, staring at the valley, watching the storm roll in. In town, the Iron Skulls dismounted. Leather vests, scars, tattoos, theater of dominance. Victor Reaper Kane, 6'4", 280 pounds of muscle and prison calm, led them. He'd built his empire on fear, 22 towns across 4 states. No one had stopped him, not yet. The townsfolk of Clearwater froze behind glass windows and half-closed blinds. Victor liked that look, the way fear rippled through quiet communities. "Morning, Sheriff," Victor said, voice lazy, confident. "Nice little place you got here." Tom Mitchell stepped out of his office. 58 years old, steady hands, no illusions. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" Victor lit a cigarette. "Just passing through. Gas, food, maybe a little hospitality tax." "That's called extortion," Tom said quietly. Victor smiled without warmth. "Call it whatever you want. We call it business." 8 of his men spread across the street, knocking over signs, testing limits. Fear worked faster than fists, and Victor understood psychology better than any cop he'd ever met. He didn't need to draw weapons. The performance was enough. By evening, Clearwater belonged to the Iron Skulls. And up on her ranch, Alexandra Morrison heard every note of that power being stolen. She ate in silence that night, alone at the kitchen table. The sound of motorcycles drifted faintly through the valley, echoing off the low hills. She could almost picture the scene. Old Patricia Henderson at the cafe, shaking as they demanded money. The sheriff trying to stand tall with nothing but a badge and a .38 against 35 men who'd stopped caring about laws a long time ago. She could ignore it, let it happen. People needed to learn their own lessons, right? That's what she told herself. Then she remembered another sound: screams in Kandahar, a child's cry in Somalia, a promise whispered to dying teammates that she'd never stand by again. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. No, not yet. Not unless it came to her door. By 4:30 p.m. it did. 11 motorcycles turned off Highway 89 and rumbled up her gravel drive, kicking up long tails of dust in the golden light. She knew the pattern immediately. Lead vehicle up front, enforcers flanking, secondary line holding perimeter. Organized chaos. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot, wiping her hands on her jeans. No visible weapon, no panic, just stillness, the kind that makes predators hesitate without knowing why. Victor dismounted, his boots crunching gravel. He took his time, the slow walk of a man who thought intimidation was art. "Afternoon, miss," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful property you got here." "Thanks," Alexandra said softly. "Thing is," Victor continued, "we've been providing security for your neighbors down in town, making sure nothing bad happens to them, and we'd hate for something bad to happen to a nice ranch like this." "I don't need security," she said. He chuckled. "That's what they all say at first. Look, you give us, say, $3,000 and we make sure no accidents happen. Fair deal, right?" Alexandra looked at him, really looked. The tattoos, the scars, the way his men laughed behind him. She measured distance, positioning, hand movement. She could see every potential threat, every weapon, and she could end this in 15 seconds. But she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Her voice stayed calm. "You should leave." Victor smirked. "And if we do?" Her eyes met his, green, unreadable. "Then you'll regret it." Laughter broke the tension for a second. 11 men laughing at a barefoot woman in denim and dirt. Victor reached out to grab her arm. "Sweetheart, you really don't under." He didn't finish the sentence. Her hand moved faster than the eye could follow, twist, pivot, leverage. One heartbeat later, Victor was on his knees, gasping as she held his wrist in a perfect joint lock, pain balanced on the edge of bone. "Stay where you are," she said quietly to the others. "This is your only warning." They froze. Marcus Chains Delgado, younger, reckless, reached for the pistol under his jacket. Alexandra released Victor and moved. 2 steps, a palm strike to the solar plexus, and he folded before he even hit the ground. Another lunged. She sidestepped, redirected his weight, used his momentum to drive his head into the hood of his own bike. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 15 seconds. 5 men down. The rest stopped breathing. Victor stood, cradling his arm, face purple with rage and disbelief. "You're dead. We'll burn this place to the ground." "No," Alexandra said, voice steady. "You're going to leave. Because if you don't, I'll make one phone call and things will get very bad for you." Victor spat. "Who you gonna call? That useless sheriff?" She didn't answer, just took her phone from her back pocket, scrolled through contacts and pressed dial. "Cooper," she said when the call connected. Her tone changed, clipped, professional. "Code Silver, 35 total, 11 here, I've handled 5. Rest are in town, split into 3 groups, ETA." 17 minutes, came the voice on the other end. Calm, controlled. "Confirmed." She ended the call and slid the phone back into her pocket. Then she walked to her porch, sat down on the steps and rested her elbows on her knees, completely relaxed. Victor stared at her. "Who the hell are you?" But she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because 23 miles away, 5 people had just dropped everything. Jake Cooper killed the welder torch and lifted his face shield. No hesitation. just quiet movement. He knew what code silver meant. He called 4 numbers one by one. Martinez, Taylor, Kim, Bennett, we're moving, Clearwater, no questions, 19 minutes. Within 90 seconds, 5 lives changed direction. Luis Martinez left a construction site mid-project. Rachel Taylor locked the door of her small veterinary clinic. Sandra Kim abandoned her half-eaten lunch in a diner. David Bennett closed his laptop mid-sentence. They didn't ask why. Because 2 words had bound them forever: ghost calls. Each owed her their life, some more than once. And when Ghost called, you didn't ask, you moved. Back at the ranch, Alexandra sat quietly as the bikers argued among themselves, fear creeping in like dusk. The sun had started to drop behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the property. She looked at Victor. You should have taken my offer, she said softly. He glared, jaw tight, trying to read her. Who did you call? But she only smiled. Some lessons couldn't be taught with words. And far down Highway 89, dust clouds rose from 5 pickup trucks moving fast but controlled, headlights off, engines tuned low. 5 people, 5 shadows, 5 debts about to be repaid. The wolves were coming home. What do you tell yourself when the life you buried starts breathing again? She watched the gravel shimmer under the last of the daylight, phone still warm in her hand. The number she just called was a bridge she'd sworn to burn years ago. Ghost was back. For a moment, Alexandra Morrison just sat there on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, head bowed. The wind brushed her hair across her face, whispering against the wood. Inside her chest, something old and dangerous stirred, not adrenaline exactly, but recognition. She remembered that sound, the steady, almost inaudible click of a safety catch, the way silence pressed against your eardrums before a breach, the way you could taste fear, metallic, thin, electric. She hated that she didn't hate it. 2 years of quiet living, gone with one call. Her horses had wandered to the far fence, unsettled by the smell of fuel and the presence of strangers. 11 motorcycles stood idle in her drive, their riders whispering in low, angry voices, glancing at her porch like they couldn't decide whether she was insane or lethal. She almost pitied them, almost. Victor Kane paced in front of his men, rage bleeding through the cracks in his confidence. He'd built his empire on intimidation, on the certainty that people break before things get serious. But the woman sitting barefoot on the porch, calm, steady, unreadable, didn't fit into his world. He couldn't know that she once spent 91 hours under sniper fire without blinking, that she'd stitched herself up twice on 2 continents, that she'd learned long ago how to weaponize patience. Who was that on the phone? Victor demanded again. Alexandra looked up slowly. Someone you really don't want to meet. Victor snorted, masking uncertainty with laughter. Lady, I've met cartel bosses, prison shot callers, mercs. You think I'm scared of your boyfriend and his pickup truck? Her gaze held his for a beat too long, steady and cold. Not scared enough, she murmured. He turned away, muttering orders to his crew. They spread out, checking weapons, engines idling again, trying to reclaim control of the situation. Alexandra let them. Let them believe movement meant dominance. Inside, she was somewhere else entirely. Back in a dust-coated safe house outside Kandahar, a younger version of herself sitting against a wall, blood on her hands that wasn't hers. Her team leader Cooper telling her she'd done good, that they were alive because of her. She remembered not feeling proud. She felt hollow. That same hollow ache pressed inside her chest now. Was this who she really was? The weapon they'd made? The one who could turn 11 armed men into a footnote in 15 seconds? She'd left to become someone else. Someone who mended fences and nursed horses. Someone who didn't hear ghosts every time thunder rolled. But the truth was simple. People like her didn't get to retire. They only waited until the world needed a monster again. She checked her watch, 11 minutes. In that time, she replayed the entire layout of her ranch in her head. Approach vectors, fields of fire, exit routes, choke points. The habit came back as easily as breathing. She hated how natural it felt. Down the drive, one of the bikers, a wiry man with scorpion ink on his neck, kicked at the gravel and spat. "Boss, we wasting time. Let's torch this place." Victor didn't answer right away. He was studying her now, really looking. Something about the way she sat, the stillness, made him uneasy. Predators recognize each other, even if they don't want to admit it. Finally he said, "Mount up. We'll circle the property, scare her a bit, she'll talk." Engines roared to life again, loud and careless. Dust rose around the house like smoke. Alexandra didn't move. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, one vibration. That was Cooper's signal, 5 minutes out. She exhaled slowly. "You boys are about to have the worst 5 minutes of your lives," she whispered. The lead biker revved closer, throwing gravel at her boots. Another shouted something obscene. The noise didn't reach her. She heard only her heartbeat, steady, quiet, familiar. Then faintly beneath the engines a new sound. Low, even mechanical, trucks. Her shoulders relaxed. 23 miles away, 5 pickups tore down Highway 89 like silent missiles. No headlights, no chatter, just precision. Jake Cooper drove point, jaw set, eyes on the horizon. In the seat beside him, Luis Martinez loaded a sidearm, checked it once, holstered it. "Feels like old times," Martinez muttered. "Old times got too many ghosts," Cooper replied. Rachel Taylor's voice came over comms, calm and clipped. "Visual on Clearwater Valley, 2 miles." They'd each been living civilian lives that never quite fit. Construction, veterinary work, tech consulting, masks that kept the world comfortable. But under those masks, the mission never really left. Ghost had called, that was enough. They didn't talk about what code silver meant anymore. Once upon a time it had stood for domestic threat, potential civilian exposure. Now it meant one thing, Ghost's life in danger. Back at the ranch, Alexandra stood. Dust swirled around her porch as the bikers circled, tires chewing gravel. Her hair whipped across her face, but her expression didn't change. "Lady, you think you're tough," Marcus Chains Delgado shouted over the noise. "You're just one." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes flicked past her shoulder. 5 pickup trucks had just crested the hill. They moved in formation so tight it looked choreographed, deliberate, silent, inevitable. Engines cut simultaneously. Doors opened in sync. 3 men, 2 women, ordinary clothes, extraordinary posture. Alexandra smiled faintly. "Told you." The bikers froze. Jake Cooper met her halfway across the yard. They didn't shake hands, didn't speak at first. Just that look, the kind that passes between people who have bled together and don't need words to remember why. "Ghost," he said finally. "Cooper, good to see you breathing." "Depends on the day," she replied. He scanned the motorcycles, the men, the house, the terrain, one sweep, one mental map. "These the ones. 11 here, rest in town, split into 2 groups." He nodded once. "No surprise, no questions. We'll handle it." Lewis stepped forward, stocky and scarred, eyes flicking over the bikers. "Injuries?" 5, mostly pride." Rachel Taylor cracked her knuckles, smile thin. "Want us to emphasize your point?" Alexandra shook her head. "Just your presence should do it." But there was the faintest edge of amusement in her eyes. Victor Kane stared at the new arrivals, confusion turning slowly into dread. Something about the way they moved, not nervous, not aggressive, just trained. Too trained. He felt the first cold wave of instinctive fear crawl down his spine. Sandra Kim, petite and quiet, walked around one of the bikes, studying the insignia. "Iron Skull's MC," she said. "Multi-state operation. Extortion, drugs, weapons. You boys are on 6 different watch lists." Victor blinked. Who are you people? Jake turned his head, eyes level, calm as winter. Friends of Alexandra. That was when Marcus spoke, voice cracking slightly. Ghost. Alexandra tilted her head. That's what they used to call me. Silence. The word spread through the group like electricity. Even wind seemed to stop. Marcus took a step back, face pale. You're the ghost, Kandahar ghost, the one who. Stories grow in retelling, she interrupted. Lewis smiled faintly. Funny thing about stories, though, most of them start with truth. Victor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He'd heard the rumors. Everyone in the underworld had. The operator who didn't exist, who dismantled cartel strongholds solo, who'd pulled soldiers out of impossible corners and vanished before anyone could ask who she worked for. He thought those were bedtime legends for soldiers, not someone barefoot on a porch in Wyoming. He realized too late that monsters sometimes retired to small towns. Jake gave quiet orders, voice like gravel in calm seas. Sandra, David, take town group. Lewis, Rachel, flank West Road. We'll hold here. Engine started again, this time not from the bikers. Two pickups peeled off down opposite sides of the hill, disappearing toward Clearwater. Victor's men shifted nervously. The balance had changed, completely and irreversibly. Alexandra looked at them one last time. You can still leave, that's your only mercy. No one moved. Then Cooper said almost kindly, your call, boys. The ranch fell into the hush before a storm. Evening light faded, sky bleeding into orange and violet. Alexandra felt something loosen in her chest, the quiet relief of control restored, the sadness of knowing what it cost her to take it back. She looked at Jake. You came fast. He smiled. You carried me 3 kilometers through Fallujah once, figured I owed you. She almost laughed. It came out as a breath instead. We're getting too old for this. Speak for yourself. For a second, the air between them softened, memory and warmth, ghosts of old missions and lost teammates. Then she looked back at Victor, and the softness vanished. Time to end this. Down in town, the sound of engines rose again. But this time, it wasn't the Iron Skulls celebrating their victory. It was 4 operators dismantling a criminal network with surgical precision. And up on the hill, Alexandra Ghost, Morrison stood barefoot in the fading light, the ghost of who she'd been finally standing beside who she'd become. She didn't want this life back, but maybe, just maybe, she still knew what to do when darkness came knocking. What happens when silence becomes more dangerous than sound? The engines were off now. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears like pressure before a storm. The Iron Skulls stood in an uneven semicircle around the porch, shifting on their feet, eyes darting between Alexandra and the strangers who had arrived like ghosts in daylight. Victor Kane felt it first, the subtle shift of control. Moments ago, he'd owned this space. Now, he was standing on someone else's battlefield. Alexandra hadn't moved since the pickups arrived. She stood at the edge of her porch, one hand resting loosely by her side, her gaze steady and unreadable. Her calm didn't look human. It looked inevitable. Jake Cooper stood just behind her, arms folded, scanning the terrain the way he always did, cataloging, calculating, predicting. Every subtle gesture between the 6 of them was a language no outsider could understand. The bikers noticed it. They noticed the silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was communication. Victor tried to break it with noise. Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this. Jake cut him off without raising his voice. This isn't a game. Something about the way he said it made Victor's stomach tighten. That tone, calm, level, absolute, was the voice of someone who'd already made decisions about who lives and who doesn't. Alexandra turned her head slightly toward Cooper. Town. They'll be fine, Jake replied. Sandra's in charge. She nodded once. Relief flickered, not fear, just confirmation that the pieces were in motion. The other trucks had already reached Clearwater. Within minutes, the iron skull's grip would crumble. Victor still didn't get it. You think 4 people can handle 24 of my men? Jake's mouth curved slightly, not amusement, something colder. No, I think they already did. The words hung there like a blade. One of the bikers, a big man with tattoos of flames across his forearms, barked out a laugh. Man, you people are crazy. Jake turned his gaze on him, and for a moment the biker's grin faltered. Cooper didn't need to speak. That look said enough. Predator to predator. You've been measured. You don't make it out of this. Alexandra watched them all quietly. 11 men, armed, angry, unsure. She could see it now in their eyes, the beginning of doubt. That moment when bravado collapses under the weight of something older, heavier, nameless. Fear. It wasn't the kind born from danger. It was the kind born from recognition. The deep, instinctive sense that you were standing across from people who'd lived in darkness and weren't afraid to return there. Her voice broke the stillness. You want to know who I am? Victor hesitated. You're nobody. Exactly. She stepped down off the porch, boots crunching softly on gravel. Nobody, no rank, no name, no file. You don't survive what I survived by being someone. You survive by disappearing. She walked past Victor, close enough for him to smell the dust and sweat on her skin. The smell of someone who had already lived through worse than he could imagine. You built your power on fear, she said, almost gently. On making people believe they're helpless. But fear doesn't last. You can scare people into silence, but you can't scare them into respect. He sneered. You think you're better than me? No, she said softly, just different. And then, almost as if to herself, you hurt people because it makes you feel alive. I hurt people because I had to keep others alive. That's the difference. Her eyes flicked toward his men. You can still walk away. No one has to bleed tonight. But she knew the answer before he gave it. Victor's pride was louder than reason. Do it, he snarled. 2 of his bikers reached for their weapons. The sound of steel clearing leather was followed instantly by movement. Not loud, not chaotic, just precise. Jake's arm blurred once. One gun hit the gravel. A second was stripped clean from its holster and landed in Alexandra's hand before its owner realized it was gone. The 2 men froze mid-motion, caught between shock and survival instinct. Jake stepped forward, his tone almost conversational. Next one who reaches for a weapon loses more than the weapon. No one tested the theory. Victor's face twisted, anger, confusion, maybe even something like shame. You think you can scare me? Jake didn't answer. He just looked at Alexandra. She sighed quietly. I wasn't trying to scare you, Victor. Then what? She turned her back to him and walked toward her porch again. I'm trying to warn you. The first gunshot came from the tree line, not from the bikers, but a warning shot from Luis Martinez's position on the west slope. It hit the dirt near the tires of Victor's lead bike, spraying gravel. Every biker jumped. Alexandra didn't flinch. She looked toward the horizon. Right on time. From their vantage, they could now see distant headlights, patrol cars, maybe 3 of them crawling toward the property. Backup was finally arriving, hours too late to matter. But the Iron Skulls didn't know that yet. All they saw were flashing lights getting closer. Victor's voice cracked with desperation. Mount up, we're leaving. Good choice, Alexandra murmured. The men scrambled to their bikes, hands shaking, trying to start engines that suddenly felt too loud, too clumsy. The smell of fuel and fear filled the air. Jake stepped beside her, low voice meant only for her. You okay? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was far away, beyond the ranch, somewhere between memory and exhaustion. Finally she said, I shouldn't be. He studied her face, the lines around her eyes, the way she held tension in her shoulders even when standing still. He'd seen it before in mirrors and teammates, people who came home but never really returned. "You did what you had to," he said. She almost smiled. "That's what we always tell ourselves." Engines roared again as the bikers prepared to flee, but before they could move, Victor's phone rang. The sound sliced through the chaos. He glanced down at the screen, one of his lieutenants calling from the northern group. Relief flickered across his face. He answered, voice rough. "Blade, talk to me." All he heard was static, then a muffled voice. "Boss, we got a problem, 2 people just." Silence. The line went dead. Victor's stomach turned to ice. Then another call, the southern group this time. He answered frantic. "Derek, what's going on?" A single sentence came through, barely audible. "They're not human." Then nothing. He looked up, every eye was on him. "What's happening?" one of his men asked. Victor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Alexandra watched, realization spread across his face. The dawning comprehension that he was already surrounded, that whatever empire he'd built on fear and fists was crumbling faster than he could process. "This is over," she said softly. But it wasn't anger in her tone, it was sadness. She knew that look, the moment someone realizes the world doesn't fear them anymore. She'd seen it in warlords, in traffickers, in insurgents who thought cruelty was armor. When fear fails, they all look the same, small, lost, human. Victor stepped forward suddenly, voice breaking. "You think you've won. You think you can walk away from this." Alexandra didn't answer. She didn't need to. The headlights from the approaching patrol cars washed over the ranch, painting everything in red and blue. For a second, it looked almost beautiful, violence and justice overlapping in color and sound. Jake exhaled quietly beside her. 17 minutes, that's a record. She looked at him, half smiling. "Guess we're not that rusty." The bikers were disarmed by the time the first deputies arrived. They sat in a line on the gravel, heads down, hands visible. None of them spoke. Sheriff Mitchell stepped out of his cruiser, wide-eyed. "What in God's name?" Jake just nodded politely. They were trespassing. The sheriff blinked, scanning the scene, 35 motorcycles, a dozen bruised men, and 6 civilians standing calm like they'd just finished fixing a fence. "Trespassing, huh? Wyoming takes property rights seriously," Jake said, deadpan. Alexandra almost laughed, almost. The sheriff sighed. "I don't know who you people are, but I'm glad you're on my side." "We're not on sides," Alexandra said softly, "just cleaning up our backyard." As the bikers were rounded up, Victor was the last to be cuffed. He kept staring at Alexandra, not hate, not rage, just something hollow. "You could have killed us," he said quietly. "I know. Why didn't you?" She looked at him a long moment. The night breeze carried the smell of dust and gasoline. "Because fear teaches nothing, but regret might." Victor swallowed, words caught behind his teeth. Then she turned away. Later, as the last patrol car rolled out, Cooper found her sitting on the porch again. The same place it had all started. "Still thinking?" he asked. She nodded, "Always." He sat beside her, the boards creaking under their weight. For a while neither spoke. The sky above them was 1,000 shades of blue and black, stars scattered like secrets. "You miss it?" he asked finally. "Which part?" "The noise, the clarity, knowing who the bad guys were." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I think I miss the people more, the ones who understood what silence costs." Cooper nodded slowly. "We're still here, Ghost." "I know." And for the first time that night, she looked almost peaceful. But far away, beyond the quiet lights of Clearwater, a different kind of silence gathered, the kind that comes before questions. Federal ones, media ones, the kind that doesn't stop at state lines. The Iron Skulls had been a small piece of something larger. And Alexandra Morrison's world, the one she'd tried so hard to leave behind, was already whispering her name again. Because ghosts don't disappear. They wait. What do warriors do when the battle ends and silence returns? For Alexandra, it always felt louder after. The sirens had faded. The last of the patrol cars had disappeared down the road, their flashing lights swallowed by the Wyoming dusk. All that remained was dust in the air and the faint hum of cicadas starting their night chorus. The ranch was still again, but not peaceful, never truly peaceful. She stood by the corral fence, the same spot where she'd watched the motorcycles first appear hours earlier. The wood was rough beneath her palms. The smell of fuel still clung to the ground, mixing with dry hay and iron. The contrast made her stomach turn. Behind her, the house glowed faintly from the porch light, warm, soft, ordinary. But she didn't feel ordinary. She never did after moments like this. Jake Cooper walked up quietly beside her, boots crunching gravel. He carried 2 bottles of beer, one extended toward her. She took it wordlessly. Neither of them looked at the other at first. "Sheriff gone?" she asked. "Yeah, county's processing what's left of them." She nodded slowly, eyes on the horizon. "It's never really over, you know." "It's over for tonight," Jake said. "That's a start." They stood there a long time without speaking, the sky bleeding from orange to deep violet. The wind had cooled, carrying the scent of sagebrush and coming rain. Finally, Alexandra exhaled. "I thought I was done with this." "I know," he said. "I promised myself no more callsign, no more ghosts." He took a drink, eyes still on the horizon. "And yet here we are." She gave a faint, bitter laugh. "Yeah, here we are." Inside the house, the others were scattered through the living room and kitchen, moving quietly, like soldiers do after the adrenaline fades. Sandra Kim sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping black coffee, her eyes half shut. Rachel Taylor leaned against the kitchen counter, bandaging a scrape on her knuckle with a strip of gauze she'd pulled from the first aid drawer like it was muscle memory. Luis Martinez stood near the window, watching the empty driveway, one shoulder pressed against the frame. David Bennett typed silently on a laptop, fingers flying, already compiling information. They weren't celebrating, they never did. It wasn't victory they felt after nights like this, just the absence of disaster. When Cooper and Alexandra came back inside, 5 pairs of eyes lifted. The air shifted subtly, everyone straightening without needing to. "All secure," Jake said. Sandra nodded. "Town's quiet. Locals are calling us angels or outlaws, hard to tell which." "Both," Rachel murmured, "depending on who you ask." Louis chuckled softly. "They'll be telling stories by morning, probably add dragons and explosions by noon." Alexandra gave a tired half-smile. "Let them. Maybe it'll keep others away." She walked toward the sink, ran cold water over her hands. The blood on her knuckles wasn't hers, but it still felt wrong. She watched it swirl down the drain, thin ribbons fatting into nothing. "You all didn't have to come," she said quietly. Louis shrugged. "You made a rule, Ghost, when you call, we move." "I shouldn't have." "Then don't," Rachel said gently, "but we'd still show up." Alexandra looked at her, really looked. Rachel's eyes were steady, soft, but unflinching. There was no judgment, no question, just truth. "I didn't want to pull anyone back into this," Alexandra said. Sandra smiled faintly. "Too late." "Besides," Louis added, "it felt good to be useful again." That hit her harder than she expected. She saw it in all their faces, the way they stood a little taller tonight, like people who'd found the piece of themselves they'd been missing. Ordinary life had dulled their edges, but this brought back the clarity they all secretly craved. It terrified her, because clarity and chaos had always been the same thing for people like them. Later, after the laughter faded into soft conversation, Alexandra stepped outside again. The stars were sharp now, thousands of them, scattered across a black so pure it hurt to look at. The land stretched for miles, quiet and eternal. Cooper joined her again, this time without words. He leaned on the porch rail, hands clasped loosely. "You did good," he said eventually. "I didn't do anything," she replied. "You all did. You started it, you finished it." She took a sip from her bottle, eyes on the sky. "Maybe that's the problem." He tilted his head slightly. "You still think you can outrun who you are." "I've tried. And—" She smiled faintly, sad. "Turns out the ghosts run faster." He chuckled softly, then went quiet again. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I got your call I didn't think twice, just moved. Haven't done that in years." "I know," she said, "and I'm sorry." "Don't be. It felt right, like muscle memory." She glanced at him. "You miss it." He didn't deny it. Sometimes, not the killing, not the noise, but the purpose, the simplicity of it. Out there everything made sense. Home doesn't. She understood too well. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Home asks you to live when all you ever learned was how to survive." They stood there in silence, letting the wind carry what neither of them could say. Inside, laughter broke softly, the kind that comes after years of silence. Rachel had found old whiskey in Alexandra's pantry, and Louis was trying to teach Sandra how to play cards again. David was losing quietly on purpose. For a moment it almost felt normal, like any other night among friends. Alexandra watched through the doorway, smiling faintly. These were her people, the only ones who truly understood what peace cost. Cooper noticed her watching. "You ever think about coming back?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I gave enough. I just want to stay here, fix fences, watch the sky." He nodded, though she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You think they'll let you?" She frowned. "Who?" "The world," he said. "It has a way of finding people like us." She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. An hour later the house was quiet again. The others had fallen asleep, some on couches, some on the floor. The exhaustion after operations like this always came fast and heavy. Alexandra sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty glass in front of her. The lamp above hummed softly. Her mind wandered, flashes of the past like broken film reels. Sandstorms in Kandahar, the sound of rotors above Somalia, the cries of hostages she couldn't save in Syria. Every mission she'd buried behind ranch fences came back tonight, dragging their ghosts with them. She rubbed her eyes. Her hands were shaking now. That never happened before. The floor creaked softly. Cooper stood in the doorway watching her. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't." He nodded. "I know." He poured himself a glass of water, sat across from her. "You remember what you told me once, after Fallujah?" She looked up. "Remind me." "You said every fight leaves a scar, even the ones you win, because part of you always stays there." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like something I'd say after too much morphine." He grinned. "Maybe, but it was true." They sat there for a while, two soldiers pretending to be civilians, pretending they weren't still wired for war. Finally Cooper said, "You did what had to be done. You didn't go looking for it, it found you." "Yeah," she said quietly, "and it'll find me again." He reached across the table, resting a hand over hers. It was the first time he'd touched her all night. "Then we'll answer again." She didn't pull away. Outside, the Wyoming night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled soft, low, familiar. Alexandra listened to it and thought about what peace really meant. Maybe it wasn't silence. Maybe peace was the space between storms, the short breath before the next call, the fragile calm you learn to love even when you know it won't last. She glanced at Cooper, who had fallen half asleep in the chair opposite her, arms crossed, head tilted back. His face looked younger when he wasn't carrying command. She smiled faintly. "Still watching over me," she whispered. Then she stood, turned off the light and looked out through the window one last time. The land stretched endless under starlight, quiet, strong, eternal. Her phone sat on the counter beside her, screen dark, silent. For now, because she knew how these things went, word would spread, questions would rise, the wrong people would start digging into Clearwater. And the past she'd buried wasn't done with her yet. But for tonight, the storm had passed, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to exhale. Sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all, it simply acts. End of part 4. Approximately 560 words. Would you like part 5 too? A. Shift focus to the federal investigation and media aftermath, as Ghost's past begins surfacing and threatens her peace. Or B. Show the next day in Clearwater, locals' gratitude, sheriff's quiet visit, and the soft human closure before outside forces arrive. You said 5. ChatGPT said. Perfect. Part 5 will open the next morning in Clearwater, showing how the town processes what happened, the sheriff's quiet gratitude, and Alexandra's calm attempt to return to normal before the distant echo of a larger storm begins to rise. Tone, grounded, cinematic, reflective, emotionally soft but foreshadowing. Length, about 1,550 words. Cinematic narrative, Part 5. What does peace sound like the morning after a war? In Clearwater, Wyoming, it sounded like coffee cups clinking against saucers again. It sounded like doors unlocking, voices returning, life resuming, a little shaken, a little unsure but breathing. The sun broke over the valley in slow gold, touching the rooftops of Main Street, the diner, the tiny hardware store. For the first time in 24 hours, the town smelled like itself again: dust, coffee, diesel, and bread. Old Patricia Henderson was already behind her counter, apron tied, humming softly as she poured the first cup of the day. She swept up the broken glass before dawn, patched the cracked display window with cardboard and tape. When the first customer came in, Deputy Rick, still in his uniform from the night before, she just smiled and poured him coffee. "Crazy night, huh?" he said. "Every town gets one," Patricia replied. "Ours just got lucky with who showed up." Nobody used the word ghost, but everyone was thinking it. Up the hill, the ranch was quiet again. The trucks were gone. The tracks of 35 motorcycles scarred the driveway like memories that wouldn't fade. Alexandra Morrison was already in the field, fixing a fence line. The morning light hit her hair, turning the brown to copper, the color of sun-warmed bullets. She wore the same denim shirt, sleeves rolled, hands calloused and steady. She'd barely slept. She'd lain in bed for 2 hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, the creak of boards, the faint snore from Louis asleep on the couch, the hum of the fridge. Peace had weight to it, and sometimes it pressed harder than battle. Now she welcomed the routine: hammer, nail, pull, repeat. The rhythm soothed her. It was something she could control. A pickup engine rolled up behind her. She didn't look up. "Morning, Sheriff." Tom Mitchell leaned out the window, hat in hand. "How'd you know it was me?" She smiled faintly. "Your truck has a bad timing belt. I can hear it half a mile away." He laughed softly, climbed out. "Figured I'd check on you. Whole town's buzzing." "I can imagine." Some say angels dropped out of the sky. Others say mercenaries. I'm guessing the truth, somewhere in the middle. "Probably," she said. He nodded, watching her work for a moment. "You know, I've been sheriff here 33 years. Thought I'd seen everything. Then last night happened." "Sorry for the trouble." "Trouble?" He shook his head. "You saved half the county. Those people in town, they'll remember. You gave them something they forgot they had." "What's that?" "Courage." She didn't answer, just drove the nail home with one clean strike. They walked the fence line together, quiet except for the chirp of grasshoppers and the creak of wood. Federal boys are coming, Tom said finally. She stopped mid-swing. When? Soon, words already spreading. 35 arrests, multi-state warrants. Someone upstairs wants to know how 6 civilians did what 4 states couldn't. Alexandra felt the chill settle behind her ribs. And you told them. I told them a small town stood up for itself, Tom said. Didn't mention names. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the weariness in his eyes. He wasn't naive. He knew there were stories better left untold. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded. You earned your peace, Miss Morrison. Don't let them take it. He tipped his hat, climbed back into his truck, and drove off down the long dirt road, the dust trailing like a promise she hoped he could keep. Inside the house, the team was beginning to stir. Louis was making eggs that looked like construction work. Rachel was sitting on the counter, hair messy, sipping black coffee. Sandra had found an old radio and tuned it to a local station. Static crackled, then a voice. In an unprecedented overnight arrest, 35 members of the Iron Skulls Motorcycle Club are in federal custody this morning. Sources say the group has been linked to multiple crimes across 4 states. Federal authorities are investigating how the arrests unfolded. Sandra turned down the volume. We're famous, she said dryly. Infamous, Rachel corrected. David walked in, laptop under his arm. FBI's already sniffing. They'll figure out the vehicles in about 12 hours. Louis groaned. You scrubbed the plates, right? Of course, but they'll still ask questions. Town's small. Somebody will talk. Alexandra entered through the back door, wiping her hands. Then we leave before they get here. Jake, who'd been leaning against the wall half listening, spoke for the first time. You sure? She nodded. We came in quiet, we leave the same way. An hour later the trucks were packed. No goodbyes, no handshakes. That wasn't their way. Just brief glances, those small, wordless exchanges that said more than speeches. Louis tossed her a wink. Next time you need fence work, call me before the army. Rachel smiled. Or just invite us for dinner. Sandra hugged her, quick, one-armed, soldier style. You keep pretending you're retired, Ghost. We'll keep pretending to believe you. David nodded, no words. Just that steady look of loyalty, the kind that outlasts distance. Jake was last. He closed the tailgate, turned to her, and smiled faintly. Still think you're done? Still hopping, she said. He gave a slow nod. Hope's good, just don't mistake it for peace. Then he climbed into the truck. Engines started. Gravel crunched. One by one they rolled out, 5 trucks heading in 5 directions, disappearing into the wide, endless Wyoming day. She stood there long after they were gone, the dust swirling around her boots. Alone again. But not empty. In town, life stitched itself back together. People swept their shops, restocked shelves, replaced windows. Sheriff Mitchell organized statements but told the deputies to keep names vague. The official story became simple. A group of unidentified Good Samaritans helped subdue a criminal gang. The people liked that version. It felt almost holy. By noon, someone had painted a sign outside Patricia's cafe. No fear in Clearwater. Alexandra drove past it once, later that afternoon on her way to pick up feed. Heads turned. People waved. A few smiled too long, like they were seeing her differently now. She hated that. At the store, the clerk, a kid barely 20, tried to offer her coffee for free. She refused gently. Pay like everyone else, she said. I'm not special. But when she left, the kid whispered to another, that's her, the ranch girl. She heard it but didn't look back. Back home, the sky darkened with evening rain. The first drops hit the porch roof like small, measured footsteps. Alexandra sat on the steps, watching the water run down the railing. The air smelled clean again, washed of fuel and fear. Her phone buzzed once, unknown number. She stared at it for a long time before answering. Ghost, a man's voice said, clipped, professional, familiar in tone if not name. She closed her eyes. "You have the wrong number." "Doubt it. This line been dead for 2 years. Hard to mistake that kind of silence." She didn't reply. "Relax," the voice said. "Not a threat, just information. The Iron Skull's case is tied to something bigger, names you recognize, people you thought were gone." Her jaw tightened. And the Bureau's coming to Clearwater. They'll want to talk to the woman who took down 35 bikers." "I didn't take anyone down." He chuckled softly. "You didn't have to, that's what scares them." The line went quiet for a second. Then, "If you want to stay invisible, now's the time to start running again." Click. The call ended. She sat there staring at the rain. The storm rolled over the plains like a slow drumbeat, lightning flickering far away. Alexandra stood, walked to the barn, and checked the locks. The horses were restless, hooves clattering softly. She stroked one's neck, whispering. "It's all right," she murmured. "We're safe." But even as she said it, she knew safety was temporary, a word people used when they didn't want to say waiting. She looked out across the valley. The town's lights glowed faintly in the distance, tiny points of courage against the vast dark. They'd wake tomorrow and keep going. They rebuild. They tell stories about angels and outlaws, and she'd let them, because maybe the myth was what they needed more than the truth. But she also knew this wasn't finished. Every operation has an echo. And this one was just beginning to reach her. When the rain finally stopped, she walked back to the porch. Her reflection shivered in a puddle at her feet, the same woman she'd been the day before, but somehow heavier, older. She looked up at the sky. Clouds broke apart, revealing stars again. "Sometimes," she whispered, "peace is just the space between storms." Then she turned off the porch light, stepped inside, and closed the door. Outside, the land breathed vast, patient waiting. And somewhere in that distance, a line of black SUVs was already crossing the state border. Headed for Clearwater. Headed for her. What makes a soldier move again, after swearing he never would? Sometimes it's not duty, not orders. Just one name. Jake Cooper heard it in the middle of the night. A single word carried through static and bad reception. Ghost. He froze. He was in his small workshop outside Cody, welding a gate for a rancher. Sparks danced off steel, lighting the walls in orange flashes. He killed the torch, pulled off his mask, and let silence settle. For a long time he just stood there, staring at the phone vibrating on his workbench. The caller ID said Martinez. He knew, before he picked up, that this wouldn't be a social call. "Jake," Lewis said, voice low, urgent. "We've got a situation." "Talk." "You were right. Feds are moving in on Clearwater. Black SUVs, unmarked, but I caught a bureau tag at the gas station outside Riverton. They're not local. They're coordinated." Jake rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the weight of inevitability. "You talked to Ghost." No response, probably turned her phone off. "Good, she should." Lewis hesitated. "You think they're coming after her?" Jake's eyes lifted to the darkness beyond the open workshop door, the empty Wyoming plains under moonlight. "They don't come that heavy for a debrief. They're not asking questions. They're closing files." Lewis swore softly. "You want me to move?" Jake didn't answer for a moment. He looked down at his scarred hands. The same hands Ghost had pulled through the sand in Fallujah. The same hands that once held her bleeding steady in a helicopter too far from safety. He thought of her porch light flickering in the rain, of the way she said hope's good, but don't mistake it for peace. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we're moving." By dawn, 5 people were on the road again. Lewis left his half-eaten breakfast untouched. Rachel Taylor shut her clinic down with a single note taped to the door: "Family emergency." Sandra Kim wiped her fingerprints from her coffee mug and checked her sidearm before tossing it into a duffel bag. David Bennett closed his laptop mid-call, leaving an analyst on the other end wondering why the line went dead. When Ghost called, you didn't ask questions. When Ghost didn't call, you still didn't wait. They drove without headlights, without music. Old habits never faded. At the same time, 60 miles away, 3 black SUVs rolled into Clearwater. They didn't use sirens, didn't need to. Authority travels quietly. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains and store windows as the convoy stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Men in dark suits and tactical boots stepped out, their jackets marked with small, sharp letters that made everyone nervous. FBI. Sheriff Mitchell came out to meet them, hat in hand, face unreadable. The man in front, clean-shaven, expression carved from ice, flashed credentials too fast for anyone to read. Special Agent Harlow, Domestic Threat Division, he said. We're investigating the incident involving the Iron Skulls. Thought you boys handled bigger fish, Tom said, keeping his voice steady. Harlow didn't smile. We do, that's why we're here. He looked down Main Street, eyes scanning the quiet buildings, the repaired windows, the fresh paint. Place looks calm. It's Wyoming, the sheriff said. We get calm quick. Harlow's gaze came back to him. You filed reports. 35 suspects, all captured alive, minimal resistance, no civilian casualties. You want to tell me how that happened? Teamwork, Tom said evenly. The agent studied him for a long moment, then turned toward the window. Patricia's cafe was open again. Locals eating breakfast, glancing up nervously. Teamwork, Harlow repeated softly. Funny word for ghosts. Tom didn't flinch, but inside his stomach turned cold. Up at the ranch, Alexandra was already awake. She'd known they'd come eventually. She just hadn't expected them this fast. She watched through binoculars from the ridge above her pasture, tracking the dust trail from the valley road, too clean, too aligned, too black. Federal. She lowered the glasses, jaw tight. Her pulse stayed steady, but her thoughts ran cold. She could vanish. There were plans, caches, old identities buried like seeds in every state west of the Rockies. But running meant becoming what she used to be. And she'd promised herself she wouldn't be that again. She turned toward the barn, mind racing. If she could buy time, maybe. The rumble of engines stopped her. Trucks, familiar ones. A convoy cresting the rise, sunlight glinting off the windshields. She didn't have to count, she knew the pattern. 1, 2, 4, 5. The cavalry had arrived. The first pickup rolled to a stop beside her fence. Dust curled around them like smoke. Cooper stepped out, his face unreadable but his eyes saying everything. You're not alone. She met him halfway. Feds, he asked. She nodded, 3 SUVs full team. Intentions. They didn't come to talk. Rachel joined them, brushing dirt from her jeans. We could disappear before they get up here. I'm not running, Alexandra said. Sandra frowned. You should, you know how this goes. The moment your name on a report, you stop being a person and start being an asset. I'm not an asset anymore. Jake looked at her for a long time. You sure about that? The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of engines from down the road. The feds were climbing the hill. We're out of time, David said quietly. He was already scanning radio frequencies through a handheld receiver, brow furrowed. Encrypted chatter. They're coming in tactically. Not a visit, a retrieval. Alexandra's stomach turned. Retrieval. They think you belong to them, Lewis said grimly. Once a ghost, always property. She looked out across her land, her fences, her fields, her horses grazing unaware. Every inch of it had been built to forget the world she came from. And now, that world was driving toward her with government plates and cold smiles. I can handle this, she said. Jake stepped closer. You don't have to. Yes, I do. If I keep running, I prove them right. If I stay, maybe I prove something else. He studied her face, then gave a small nod. Then we stay. Lewis grinned faintly. Hell, I didn't drive 200 miles to watch from the truck. Sandra checked her weapon. Just tell us how loud you want this to get. Alexandra looked at all of them, her family, her ghosts, her mirror. No noise, she said. Not yet, let me talk. The SUVs appeared minutes later, rolling up the long gravel road in perfect formation. Engines off, doors opening in sync. 7 agents stepped out, all wearing the same expression, detached efficiency. Special Agent Harlow led them, his eyes already fixed on Alexandra. Ms. Morrison, he said, you're a hard woman to find. I wasn't hiding. That's what concerns us. Jake stood a few feet behind her, silent but present. His hand rested loosely on the truck door. The message was clear. Harlow's gaze shifted briefly to him, then back to her. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Clearwater, about how one woman and a handful of acquaintances neutralized 35 armed men without a single fatality. Luck, Alexandra said. Luck doesn't move in formation, Harlow replied. She said nothing. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You had a past before this ranch, we know that. There are files blacked out, classified. The kind only exist when someone doesn't want a name attached. He studied her. The ghost, that's you, isn't it? She didn't move, didn't blink. That name doesn't mean anything anymore. Then you won't mind coming with us to clear it up. Jake shifted, voice calm but heavy. She's not going anywhere. Harlow smiled, not warmly. Mr. Cooper, isn't it? Former Delta. I suggest you step aside before this becomes something it doesn't have to be. Jake didn't move. Too late for that. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. That fragile, tense quiet before decisions are made that can't be undone. Then Alexandra spoke softly. You came all this way for what? To recruit me again, or to erase me? Harlow's eyes didn't flicker. Both, if necessary. The word hung there, cold and final. Lewis's jaw tightened. Sandra's hand hovered near her weapon. Rachel took a small step closer to Alexandra. Jake's eyes locked on Harlow, and for a moment the air between them felt electric, predator meeting predator, both measuring distance, timing, consequence. Then Alexandra raised her hand. Stop. Everyone froze. Her voice was calm, but the steel in it cut clean through the rising tension. No guns, no war, not here. She stepped closer to Harlow, close enough that he had to tilt his chin to meet her gaze. Tell your bosses I'm done being their weapon. Tell them if they come here again, they'll be facing more than a ghost. They'll be facing everything that built her. Harlow's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He knew a losing field when he saw one. He looked past her to the team, silent, steady, unflinching, and then turned on his heel. We'll be in touch. Engines roared to life. Gravel sprayed. The black SUVs disappeared down the hill, dust trailing like the retreat of something that would, inevitably, return. When the sound faded, nobody spoke for a while. Lewis finally broke the silence. Think they'll be back? Jake looked at Alexandra. What do you think? She exhaled, long and tired. They never really leave. The team watched her quietly. She looked out across the valley, sunlight cutting through retreating clouds, the land stretching endless and unbroken. For a moment, it almost looked like peace. Almost. How long can you live in the light before the dark comes looking again? Night fell fast over Wyoming. The last of the daylight vanished behind the mountains, and the Morrison Ranch disappeared beneath a sky of cold stars. The team gathered in the barn, not the house this time. The house felt too small for what needed saying. A single lantern cast their shadows across the hay and the old wooden beams. The horses stirred occasionally, uneasy, as if they sensed the storm outside hadn't really passed. Alexandra stood near the open doorway, leaning on a support post, arms folded. Jake Cooper paced slowly across the floorboards, boots silent, mind turning. Sandra Kim sat on a hay bale, cleaning her pistol without looking at it. Rachel leaned against a stall wall, quiet but alert. Louis and David watched the doorway, listening for engines that hadn't come yet but would. It wasn't fear in the air, it was expectation. "They'll be back," Rachel said finally. "Yeah," Jake murmured, "but next time they won't knock." Louis scratched at his beard. "You think they'll go tactical?" "They won't need to," David said from the corner. "They'll use paperwork, court orders, asset recovery warrants. You can erase a person with a pen faster than with a bullet." Sandra looked up. "So they're not just coming for Ghost, they're coming for all of us." Alexandra turned, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to stay." Louis laughed quietly. "We never had to, we still did." Jake stopped packing. "We need to be smart about this. They want you alive, Alex. That means leverage. They'll pressure, isolate, maybe even paint you as a threat. Once you're in custody, they own the story. I'm not letting that happen." "Then we need to make them hesitate." "By doing what?" Sandra asked. Jake met her eyes. "By reminding them what we are." Outside, the wind picked up. The sky flashed once distant lightning, silent but sharp. The scent of ozone and rain drifted through the open barn doors. Alexandra rubbed her hands together, the calluses catching faint light. "We're not soldiers anymore, Jake. We can't fight the government." "Who said anything about fighting?" he said. "You want to keep your peace. We make them believe you're not worth the cost." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You mean disappear?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched. Finally, Rachel spoke softly. "Maybe he's right. Maybe you can't live in peace when the world remembers your shadow." Alexandra's voice lowered. "I'm tired of disappearing, Rachel." "I know," Rachel said, "but peace doesn't mean staying still. Sometimes it means choosing where not to be found." The words landed heavy, truth disguised as kindness. Across the plains, miles away, headlights carved through darkness. Special Agent Harlow drove alone, the road stretching empty ahead of him. His reflection in the windshield looked older than it had that morning. The call came through his encrypted line. "This is Harlow." A voice on the other end, sharp and polished. "Report." "Contact made. She's alive. She's not resisting." "Good." There was a pause, long enough for him to feel the shift, that familiar cold tone of people above him deciding the fate of someone they'd never met. "You will maintain surveillance," the voice continued. "If she moves, you follow. If she contacts anyone, you record. And if she vanishes—" Harlow clenched his jaw. "Understood." The line clicked dead. He drove in silence for a while, headlights painting long, lonely stripes across the road. He didn't like this job. He'd read her file, what little wasn't redacted. He'd seen what she'd done, what she'd survived. He'd lost men in wars she'd ended. And now the same people who'd used her were calling her a liability. He wondered how long it would take before the word liability turned into something uglier. Back at the ranch, rain started to fall, slow, soft, tapping the barn roof like a heartbeat. Alexandra looked at her team, her family, and saw what she'd dragged them back into. The same exhaustion in their eyes she'd seen years ago after missions gone sideways, after decisions that cut too deep to forget. "I never meant for this," she said quietly. Jake shook his head. "Doesn't matter what you meant, it matters what you do next." Sandra's voice was soft but steady. "So what's the plan?" Alexandra hesitated. She wasn't used to planning anymore. Not this kind, not against her own flag. She walked toward the workbench, grabbed a folded tarp, unrolled it. Beneath it lay her rifle, the one she hadn't touched since the day she left her last assignment. The metal gleamed dull under the lantern light. "I keep thinking," she said, almost to herself, "if I build enough fences, plant enough grass, Maybe I'll forget what my hands are capable of. She picked up the weapon, weighed it in her palms. But maybe peace isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about deciding what's still worth protecting. Jake watched her. He saw the shift in her shoulders, not surrender, not aggression, but acceptance. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking they already took 9 years of my life. I'm not giving them this ranch too." David looked up from his laptop, the glow reflecting off his glasses. "We can monitor their comms from here. If they're running surveillance, I'll know." "Good," Jake said. "We stay invisible until we decide otherwise." Lewis grinned. "Invisible? Buddy, we're standing in a barn with a wanted legend. I'd call that optimistic." The joke landed the way he meant it to, just enough to break the tension. A few smiles flickered. Then quiet again. Rain softened. Thunder rolled far off like a memory. Alexandra sat on an overturned crate, elbows on her knees, staring into the dark outside. "I used to believe in what we did," she said. "Every mission, every op, every target, it was for something bigger. Freedom, safety, the greater good." Jake leaned against a post. "And now? Now I think we were just stories people told themselves to sleep at night." Sandra looked up. "You don't believe in good anymore." "I believe in loyalty," she said. "That's enough." Her gaze drifted to the others. "You all came because I called once, or because I didn't. Either way, that's more than I ever had in the field. That's all that matters." Outside, headlights appeared again, distant, moving slowly along the highway. Everyone froze. David checked the radar feed. Not feds, civilian, small engine, pickup truck. They waited until it turned down another road and vanished. Only then did anyone breathe. Jake looked at Alexandra. "You think Harlow's watching?" "I'd be disappointed if he was." Rachel tilted her head. "You trust him." "I don't trust anyone who wears a badge for ghosts." Across the state, Harlow parked his SUV at a gas station and sat in silence. He opened a thin folder from his passenger seat, flipping through grainy photos, surveillance stills, timestamps, blurred faces. One of them was her, Alexandra Morrison, at a market, smiling faintly at a cashier. The image looked too ordinary to be dangerous. But the words "active risk asset" were stamped across the page in red. He closed the folder, exhaling slowly. He didn't like this mission. He didn't like the word containment. He'd spent 15 years chasing people who hurt others. Now he was being told to chase someone who had protected them. And yet the orders were clear. If she doesn't cooperate, neutralize. He leaned his head back against the seat and whispered to himself, "God help us if she decides not to cooperate." Back in the barn, the team began to settle in for the night, but no one really slept. The lantern burned low, flickering across familiar faces lined with fatigue and old memories. Alexandra sat awake long after the others dozed off, staring out through the open door into the rain-silvered dark. She thought of the people she'd saved, the hostages, the soldiers, the nameless. None of them would ever know her. That was the deal. Ghosts don't get gratitude. But now the same silence that once protected her was being used to erase her. She looked down at her hands, scarred and steady. Jake's voice came softly from behind her. "You're thinking too loud." "Bad habits." He sat beside her, handed her a thermos of coffee. "Another bad habit." She smiled faintly. "You ever wonder what we'd be doing if we'd never signed up?" He thought for a moment. Probably something boring, something safe, something we'd hate. She laughed quietly, a sound half warmth, half ache. Then her voice softened. "They're going to come again, Jake, and next time it won't be questions." "I know. What happens when I can't stop them?" He looked at her. "Then we make sure they can't stop us." Outside, the rain stopped. The night was still, the air too quiet. Alexandra tilted her head, listening. In the distance, faint, rhythmic, a sound. Helicopter blades. Jake heard it too. He stood slowly, eyes lifting toward the horizon. David's laptop pinged. He looked up pale. They're not just coming back. Everyone turned. He swallowed hard. They're bringing a full team. What do you do when the past comes to your doorstep wearing your country's colors? Alexandra Morrison didn't sleep that night. None of them did. By 3:00 a.m. the rain had stopped, leaving the world soaked and still, a silence so deep you could hear your own pulse. The barn lights were off, the horses restless, the wind low, whispering through the grass like something trying not to be heard. They could feel it coming. The rhythm of distant rotors grew closer, heavier. The kind of sound that doesn't just fill the air, it presses on your chest. A slow, steady heartbeat of machinery and purpose. Lewis muttered, "That's not local traffic." David confirmed it, eyes locked on his laptop. One bird, maybe two. Thermal feed shows 6 vehicles inbound from the south. Convoy formation. Jake stepped outside, scanning the horizon. No moonlight, just dark shapes moving against darker land. He turned back. They're not waiting till daylight. They don't have to, Sandra said, loading her rifle. Alexandra watched them, calm but hollow-eyed. They're not coming to kill me. Jake looked at her. You sure? She nodded. If they wanted me dead, they wouldn't bring rotors. They're coming to take me alive. Rachel's voice cracked through the tension. And if you don't go, then they'll make sure nobody walks away. The words hung there, heavy, true. By the time the helicopters appeared over the ridge, everyone was in position. Not hidden, just waiting. Floodlights from the lead bird cut through the night, painting the ranch in harsh white. Dust and rain mist swirled under the blades. The air smelled of fuel and inevitability. Jake and Lewis stood near the porch. Rachel and Sandra flanked the barn. David kept the uplink open, recording everything, evidence for a truth that might never see daylight. Alexandra stood in the center of it all, unarmed, face lifted toward the noise above. When the choppers touched down, men in tactical armor poured out. No insignia, no names, just the kind of precision that says, "We've done this before." A figure stepped forward, Agent Harlow. He looked different now. No arrogance, no smile, just exhaustion and regret. He stopped 10 feet away, shouting over the blades, "Ms. Morrison, don't make this harder than it has to be." She called back, voice even, "It's already harder than it should have been." Harlow hesitated. "This isn't my call." "I know." He swallowed. "Then don't make me carry it out." Jake stepped forward, eyes sharp. "You're trespassing on private land." Harlow's men raised their weapons instantly, laser sights flashing against the darkness. Alexandra lifted her hand. "Don't." Her voice carried through the chaos, calm but commanding, the kind of tone that once stopped firefights mid-trigger. Everyone froze. She took a step forward toward Harlow. The floodlights caught her face, hard and human, the storm still clinging to her hair. "Tell me something, Agent," she said. "You ever look at your orders and wonder who benefits when you follow them?" Harlow didn't answer. His expression cracked for the briefest moment. "Do you even know who signed mine?" she asked. He stared at her, throat tight. "You're not the villain here, Morrison." "I know," she said softly, "but I'm not the hero either." Then she turned slightly, looking back at her team, her family. "I can't ask you to fight this war for me." Jake's jaw tightened. "It's not your call to make." "Yes," she said quietly, "it is." The next seconds unfolded in slow motion. Alexandra stepped forward, past the porch, into the light. Jake's hand clenched. Rachel whispered her name. Lewis muttered a prayer under his breath. She kept walking. Harlow motioned his men to hold fire. There was something in her stride, not defiance, not surrender, something in between. She stopped a few feet from him. "I'll go," she said, "but they stay." He blinked. "That's not the deal." "It is now. You can't bargain with "I'm not bargaining," she said. "I'm ending this." Behind her, Jake took a step forward. "Ghost." She turned, met his eyes, and gave a faint, tired smile. "You once told me hope isn't peace. Maybe you were right. Maybe peace isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you buy one last time." His throat worked. Words caught behind everything he wanted to say and couldn't. She gave a small nod. "Take care of the ranch." Then she faced Harlow again. "Let's go." The agents moved in, not roughly, but with purpose. They cuffed her wrists, hands in front, as if even they didn't want to pretend she was a criminal. Jake started forward, but Lewis grabbed his arm. She made her choice. Jake's voice broke. "It's the wrong one." Rachel shook her head. "Maybe it's the only one that keeps us breathing." Harlow signaled the extraction. The team moved her toward the helicopter, spotlight framing her like some unwanted monument. The rotors thundered, dust lifted. Then, over the commotion, a voice cut through the noise, hers. "Jake." He looked up. She met his eyes across the chaos. "If they write this story, don't let them end it for me." He understood. Not what she meant, why she meant it. Then she was gone. The helicopter lifted, tilting into the dark sky. Its lights faded until only the faint thump of the blades remained, echoing across the valley. And then nothing. Just wind. Just silence. The team stood there, motionless, eyes fixed on the horizon until the sound was gone. Lewis finally spoke. "We're not letting them bury her, right?" Jake didn't answer. He just stared at the night where the helicopter had vanished. Rachel wiped her eyes. "She gave up everything to keep us free." Sandra looked down. "So we make sure it meant something." Jake nodded slowly, jaw set. "We will." He turned toward the house. "We start tonight." 2 days later. Washington, D.C. Agent Harlow stood in a small observation room, separated by glass from a single chair and a silent woman. Alexandra sat still, wrists uncuffed, eyes focused on nothing. She hadn't spoken since they landed. A voice from behind him said, "She's been debriefed twice. Nothing useful." Harlow didn't turn. "You mean nothing she's willing to say?" "She's not a threat if she's contained," the voice replied. "Let her fade, easier that way." Harlow looked through the glass, studying her reflection in the one-way mirror. "She's already faded once. Look where that got us." He paused. "She deserves better." The voice behind him hardened. "Deserve has nothing to do with it." He turned then, meeting the man's eyes, the kind of bureaucrat who never dirtied his boots. "You ever wonder why people like her stop following orders?" The man frowned. "Excuse me." "Because people like you stop deserving loyalty." Harlow walked out before he could answer. That night, Alexandra was moved to a secure facility outside Langley. The guard detail was light. They didn't expect her to fight. She didn't. But she watched, she listened, she memorized. She learned long ago that the first step to freedom isn't escape, it's patience. In her cell, she sat on the narrow bed, eyes tracing the faint reflection of herself in the reinforced glass. Outside, rain began again, soft, steady, like the world whispering secrets. She whispered back, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak." She looked up at the ceiling, eyes calm, voice barely a breath. "It simply acts." Days later, a storm hit the East Coast. Lightning took down power grids across 3 counties. When the backup generators at Langley flickered back to life, Cell 14B was empty. No alarms. No broken locks. Just silence. A single phrase was written on the wall in chalk, small, precise, deliberate. "Freedom doesn't need witnesses." Weeks passed. Back in Wyoming, Jake Cooper stood on the same porch where she'd faced the helicopters. The fence had been repaired. The sky was clear. A single letter lay in his hand, no return address. No stamp, just his name, printed cleanly in block letters. Inside, a short note. You were right about hope. It's not peace, but sometimes it's enough to keep going. Take care of them, the rest is noise. Lay. He folded the note carefully, looking out across the valley. The wind carried faint echoes, not of helicopters this time, but of something softer. Freedom. He smiled faintly. You always did know how to disappear. Then he turned toward the sunrise, a new day, the world still turning, ghosts still walking among the living. And somewhere, maybe 1,000 miles away, maybe just over the next ridge, a lone motorcycle moved quietly down an empty road, its rider's hair caught in the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The engine's hum faded into the distance, swallowed by the wide silence of America. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with parades or medals. Sometimes it just rides away, unseen, unthanked, but free.